Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome to one of our last events of our 1916 Centenary Commemoration Programme. A couple of housekeeping announcements first. If you have a mobile phone, make sure that it's turned to silent or turned off. And if there's an emergency, there's an exit behind you where you came in, and there's an emergency exit over there to the left. We have a couple of more things left in the 1916 programme. There'll be the usual Remembrance Day events in November, and we have the unveiling of the Rocher de Vaha sculpture to come probably in early December. We'll let you know the date in due course. It's been held up by a few little technicalities during the year. And we'll be back here on the 29th of November when I have been prevailed upon to give a talk called Reconstructing West Clare Family Histories Using DNA. So I'll let you know about that by email in due course. Tonight we're delighted to have Eoin Shanahan here. He has a rather famous name when it comes to the War of Independence in West Clare. His uncle, Willie Shanahan, was the man commemorated by Shanahan and McNamara Park and by Shanahan Street, which we'll be hearing all about later on, which we now know as Francis Street, as it was known for 200 years, but for a brief period it was called after Eoin's uncle. Eoin has been a primary school teacher in Dublin for many years. He's now working with the education centres, training teachers around the country. He's looking forward to retiring soon to become a full-time historian. He's going to talk to us today about Patriots, remembering Patriarchs and Patriots when Kilrush streets had two names. So give a big welcome, please, to West Clare's own Eoin Shanahan.
Thank you, Paddy, and thank you everybody for coming. I have a lot to say to you tonight, so I'm going to really power through it. I'm going to go through it as fast as I can. I think I have something like 43 slides to go through, and I was estimating today that if I spent a minute and a half on each slide, I might end up going over time. So you'll forgive me if I go a little fast at times anyway. The first thing that I want to say to you, well, two things. Number one, my email address is on the slide at the moment, and I welcome emails from people because a lot of what I know, I only know it because people told it to me or shared their knowledge with me. So I always welcome people who give me little bits of information or documents or that they have found at home or whatever, or things they have seen that maybe I haven't seen. So I'm always glad to hear from people. And I share the knowledge that I have and the documents that I have as well. And believe me, I have a lot of them. Now, the other thing that I will say to you is that I feel a little bit like I'm bringing turf to Shrab Bog in coming here tonight, because I'm fully aware that there's probably a lot more knowledge about this topic sitting in front of me than what I have. So I come to you and I speak to you in all humility, and all I have to offer you is what I know and what I've researched and what people have shared with me. So I would ask as well that if you have anything to share with me, that you would do that, because then that would increase my levels of knowledge. Is that fair enough? And thus begins the roller coaster. I have to go fast from here on. Because of the actual building that we're in, I want to read you a little piece from the Manchester Guardian from the 24th of September 1888. At the top of the village of Kilrush is an excessively ugly but rather pretentious Protestant church. The path to the door does not seem to be worn by thronging feet, and indeed the church has a somewhat deserted appearance, as if it did not matter in the least. As it probably does not, whether the gates are locked or not. Behind the church is a great park wall, enclosing beautiful woods and walks, amid which stands the noble mansion of the Vandeleur family. Here Captain Vandeleur does not live. Since he came into the property, he has stayed at Kilrush on one occasion for 3 months, and that is all. Now we have it on authority of the late Lord Beaconsfield to take a witness whom Captain Vandeleur would delight to honour, that feudal relations imply duties on both sides. Captain Vandeleur's creed is that the tenants must do their duty, and that he need not. Like one of the gods of Lucretius, he dwells apart in the serenities of aristocratic ether, and leaves the poor, ragged, empty, I'm missing the next word, mortals on the coast of Clare to make what they can of life. He has not himself inquired whether they can pay his rents, and yet in existence some scanty modicum of comfort and joyousness. He is careless about their food, their clothing, their sanitary conditions under which they live, and the schooling of their children. No Christmas dolls of blankets or tea come from the Vandeleur mansion. No words of encouragement are given to the struggling and thrifty. None of friendly warning or advice to the idle and careless. The ladies of the Vandeleur family do not visit the sick and afflicted, or take little presents of wine or dainty food to such as need them. No, sympathy and kindly treatment are for Hodge in England, and not for Paddy in Clare. 1888, at the height of, we'd say, ill feeling towards the Vandeleur family, following on from the mass evictions of the late 1840s at the time of the famine, and evictions which took place in the 1880s as well. It kind of typifies the depth of feeling that existed and the antipathy towards the Vandeleurs at that time. I've said before that Kilrush has had a kind of a love-hate relationship with the Vandeleurs, because Kilrush owes a lot to the Vandeleur family as well. So it wasn't all one-way traffic. Vandeleurs were very good, and different generations of the Vandeleurs were probably better to Kilrush than others. But it's important that we see the two sides. And it's this kind of love-hate balance that kind of existed right through, even after the 1900s, even after the Great House was burnt down, I think in 1897. So, we're here to talk about street names. And the street names of Kilrush were changed by Kilrush Urban Council in June 1930. And they decided that they would change the names from Vandeleur names, and other names as well, they weren't all Vandeleur names. They decided to name them after some patriots from the War of Independence and indeed the Civil War. And those changes existed and held in part right up to 1981. And I suppose the big issue was that, I'm guessing at this, and you might be able to add a little bit of information to this, I guess there was a little bit of Civil War politics involved, because of all the people who had streets named after them, nearly all were either pre-treaty or post-treaty who were anti-treaty, if you understand. So I imagine that there was a certain amount of bit of politics at play as well, which might have influenced the fact that these street names didn't stick. Another issue that might have caused the street names not to stick was the fact, I would say, that while the Urban Council made this decision, and while it was a majority decision and a valid decision, I think legally that they might have required a plebiscite, a vote of the people who lived on a particular road who were in favour of changing the name of that road, and that vote didn't take place, to my knowledge anyway. Again, you might be able to add something to it yourselves. So, the first inkling we have of these changes comes about 1930, 1932 in the valuation books, where properties in different roads are valued for rates purposes, for people for the calculation of rates and so on. And that's typically the name of the new name of the street would appear in this book, and in brackets, formerly known as Vandeleur Street or Crofton Street, or Hector Street, or whatever it happened to be at the time. So that's the history of it, no plebiscite. And in 1981, the names were put back. The original names were actually put back up in Irish and in English, bilingually. We saw down through the years, we would see advertisements for businesses on a particular road that would go by the new name, and other businesses on the road would advertise under the old name, under the Vandeleur name. And we'll give you an example of that. So we have here Rush's Bakery. Would have been very Republican, I imagine. You'll be able to tell me whether they were or not, because they refer to their bakeries or their streets as their shops as number 1 Shanahan Street and number 52 Clancy Street. That's after Patrick Clancy. We'll talk about him in a little while. So, and then this national newspapers. So you'd see this in national newspapers as well. So we have in the one newspaper, we have a list of different businesses in the town, and we have Considine's Bakery at Shanahan Street, which is Francis Street. And then we have, further down, we have McMahon, Francis Street, Kilrush. So you have 2 businesses in the one street, and this is in the national newspaper around 1934, it's the Irish Press. So, and I have other newspaper articles as well, which would have similar issues. So we'll keep going. I'm going to start. Am I in anybody's way here, by the way? Am I in your way? If I'm in the way, I'll move aside. No? I'm okay? All right. I'm going to start with Market Square, which was renamed Martyrs Square. And the reason I'm starting with this one is because I don't think that we can underestimate the influence that the Manchester Martyrs had on young guys growing up around 1900, 1910, 1920. I don't think we can underestimate that. These were 3 young lads who were involved in breaking into a prison van. There were 3 of a crowd of 50 that broke into a prison van to rescue two Fenian prisoners in 1867, around the 20th of September. And they found the van locked, and one of them, not necessarily one of these 3, but somebody fired a bullet through the lock. And there was a policeman inside named Breac, and he was killed. And the 3 guys were tried, and at their trial, 2 in particular made very, very good speeches. I mean, their names were Alan, Larkin and O'Brien, as you probably know, but Alan was only 19, I think, you know. Very, very young guy. But they made very, very good speeches. And the story goes that either when they finished their speeches, I know when one guy, not one of those, when the others finished his speech, he ended by saying, "God save Ireland." And it kind of became a kind of a battle cry. It became a kind of a call that people would, a phrase that people would use a lot. And the story goes that when the 3 guys were being hung in Manchester in front of a crowd of 10,000 people, that each one of them, just before they went to the gallows, their last words were, "God save Ireland." And when Larkin was being hung, the hangman had to jump on him to finish the job because they got the weight wrong. So when he dropped, he didn't die. And the hangman jumped down on top of him, grabbed onto it to finish it. So these stories were very, very much alive. And Kilrush actually, in 1903, laid the foundation stone. Father Clancy from Kilrush in Kilkee, laid the foundation stone for this fantastic monument. And the money came from right all over the world. So, I mean, Kilrush builds that size of a monument to 3 guys who were, well, 2 of them were from Cork, I forget where the 3rd guy was from. And they died in Manchester, you know, so they had never been to Clare, I imagine, you know. And Kilrush builds that kind of a monument to them. It must kind of give us some idea of the depth of feeling that was there and that was aroused by the bravery, I suppose, of these 3 guys, because you had 10,000 people here waiting, or in Manchester waiting to see them squirm and cry and everything, and they didn't. They went to their deaths with these words, God Save Ireland. And T.D. Sullivan, the great songwriter, wrote a song about it then, you're probably familiar with it. God save Ireland, said the heroes. God save Ireland, said they all. Whether on the scaffold high or the battlefield we die. Oh, what matter when for Ireland dear we fall. And it became the national anthem. That was the national anthem in Ireland for about 50 years. It was sung at big events and big meetings and Sinn Féin meetings and so on. So, why am I telling you all this and why am I spending so long on it when we have so many people to talk about? Because we have a lot to talk about. I'm telling you because I think that these young guys were probably a great inspiration to most of the boys that I'm going to be talking about for the next hour or so. Because they were very young as well. And most of these guys who gave their lives in one way or another, and they gave them in different ways, the one thing they all had in common was that they were very young. They had one more thing in common. They were very brave. Just like the three Manchester martyrs. So, Market Square becomes Martyrs Square. Alan Larkin and O'Brien. The Glen became Burke Street. Who was Burke? Burke was Sonny Burke, Patrick Burke, from Carew, just outside Clare. He was born on the 31st of March 1900. That makes him around 22 when he died, I think. He's a big, strong guy. He's 6 foot, 6'2". Very, very strong fellow. He's selected to represent Clare in a weight throwing competition, but he can't do it because he's on the run. Clever guy, goes to Kilrush CBS, pretty bright fellow. But he leaves it around 1917 to join the 3rd Battalion. The 3rd Battalion, some of you may know, was around Clare Cree. And we'll be talking about the 5th Battalion later. That was back around Kilkee. He became a section commander, promoted to quartermaster in 1918, adjutant in 1919. He's captured in 1918, but he makes this fantastic escape from the guys because he was so strong. They chase him for 6 miles across the fields and almost shoot him, but they don't succeed. And his home becomes a venue for the arbitration, newly formed arbitration courts at the time. And he takes part in a very interesting attack on RIC men who were moving furniture outside Clare. And we'll talk about that in a moment when we're talking about Michael Darcy. And similar attacks, but on the 22nd of August, on the 21st of August 1920, it was a Saturday, Adjutant West Clare Brigade, Bill Hawke, comes in to Kilrush. And he comes down Moore Street and he wants to meet a certain detective, John Hanlon, from a place called Clonderalif in Kerry. And Detective Hanlon, everyone called him Hanley, but his name was Hanlon. And Bill Hawke comes in to meet this guy because he has probably raided a train a couple of days before and found a letter from John Hanlon which indicates that he knows more than he should know. More than is good for the local boys anyway. So he asks him to sign something in Walsh's pub up here in Moore Street. It's on a corner. And Hanlon gets ready to sign it and he gets a bullet through the head and it comes out over the right eye. Stone dead. And the following day, that night, first of all, Hawke is in Kilballeon with Sonny Burke and a man named Hasset and a brother of Arthur Donald from Tullycrine. And he's over there in Kilballeon protecting a Mr. W.J. Studdart, a big farmer who's being blackguarded a little bit by locals. I won't say locals, by IRA lads, I suppose, or some fellas that are trying to put them out of their land anyway. And the three guys are over there that night, and the following day they're coming home and they're passing through Ballynagun near Cree. And after what happened the day before, you can imagine there was emotions were running high in the RIC. And the three guys are driving along in a car, and they stop to put water in the radiator, and all of a sudden a police lorry comes on, and they're pulled up. Hawk is in the car, he gets rid of his gun. Sprigg Marnin from Kilkee is driving. He gets a bit of a beating, but he escapes, runs across the fields. Burke is caught with his gun, an 8-chamber gun with a load of ammunition. He's caught red-handed. He's given a pretty bad beating. A guy named Mick Honan from Kilmihil comes around the corner. He has a gun with him, so he empties the gun out at the RSC. But they still arrest the guys. They bring them to Kilrush, and what do? They bring them into the room where Hamlin is laid out, and they give them a terrible beating in there. And poor Burke got the worst of it because he was the guy that was caught with the guns, or the gun and the ammunition. And the other two are held for about a week, and then they're released. And if they only knew that they had the very man in the room that had shot Hamlin the day before, but they never recognised him. They didn't know who they had. And they let him go a week later. Burke was tried on the 3rd of September. He was sentenced to jail in Cork, 2 years hard labour. He started his sentence in Cork, and 15th of May he's transferred to Wormwood Scrubs. 24th of June he's moved to Wadensworth Prison, where he goes on hunger strike with some of the others. He's force-fed, he's hosed with water, he's left in wet clothes, and he contracts pneumonia, and which becomes pleurisy or TB. He just becomes very, very ill, strong enough as he was. 24 days hunger strike. He's released on the 28th, or possibly the 31st of October 1921. He's treated in London, and he's brought to Ennis Infirmary, and there they have to take 3 quarts, 17 ounces of fluid from his lungs. Some of them reckoned that he hadn't been treated properly in London at all. And he dies there on the 7th of March 1922. So that is Sonny Burke, and he's the guy that that street was named after. You're probably very familiar with this man because he came to national prominence, Paddy Clancy. His name was Peter Clancy, do you know? And part of Moore Street was named after, part of it at least, was named after Paddy Clancy. I think we all call him Paddy Clancy now, even though his name was Peter, But there he is, there's his mask, his prayer card, his mortuary card, Peter Clancy. And he was 29 years old. Born Cranny, County Clare. He was a draper. He worked in Kildysart, and he worked in Limerick, and he worked in Dublin in the drapery business. Easter Monday, he's on Church Street Bridge, and he stops a column of entry by shooting the horses, and when the horses fell, the infantry couldn't pass by. And extremely brave guy. On Tuesday and Wednesday, he sees this car coming down the quays towards him, and he orders them to halt, and they don't halt, so he fires, and he injures Lord Dunsany, and with him is a Colonel Lindsay. And Dunsany is, as I say, he's injured, so they arrest him, and they take him to hospital and treat him very humanely. And when he came out afterwards, or when he was finishing up with them, he said to them, "Although in different uniforms, we're all Irishmen, and you are all gentlemen." On Thursday, there's a big high building across the road from the bridge, and these snipers set up at the top story, and they're sniping at them. He gets a bit of cover from the forecourts, and he walks calmly across the bridge. He walked very straight like this, and he walks calmly across the bridge with 2 or 3 cans of petrol. He breaks a window in the building, pours in the petrol, sets it on fire, and burns them out. He's arrested, he's court-martialed like the others, he's sentenced to death, but it's commuted to 10 years imprisonment, and he gets released like a lot of the others in 1917. But he continues on with the same activities, and he's prolific. He's raiding for guns, he's attacking people, he shot an odd guy as well. And I'm just going to read a piece from Simon McInerney, because he would have got to know a few guys from around here. Tom Lillis from Kilkee. They would have been all in the same game at that time. And he gets to know Simon McInerney from Kilfeera, and he gets to know Murty Tuberty, whom I'm sure some of you have heard of. And this is the kind of stuff that he would be at. This is Simon McInerney. Clancy would take you along to some place, and you would meet a girl, but he wouldn't introduce you. He would say, "See that girl?" And you would know her again. You would meet her probably at 6 o'clock this evening or tomorrow evening at such and such a railway station. You would take the parcel, and you just leave the parcel in the carriage that the girl entered. That kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing that they were involved in. A lot of intelligence stuff in that as well. So, Bloody Sunday, you're familiar with it. Interesting story about Bloody Sunday. There was on the 20th of September 1920, there was these two guys, English guys, up in a hotel, I think in possibly Lisdoonvarna, I can't remember, or Liscannor. One of them is Captain Donald McLean, and he's up to no good. He's here spying, and he's getting chauffeured around, but he's getting the names, probably picking up the names of guys that are going to be raided in the future. And the other guy is an innocent, all right. He's a pensions officer named Collis. But the two boys get kidnapped on the Sunday. And they're held for a week, right through the Renine ambush and everything. They're held in an old castle, I think. And at the end of that week, they release them and they say to them, "Now you get out of this country and don't come back." Collis got out. McLean didn't. McLean was one of the guys who was shot on Bloody Sunday. When Michael Collins's men got up, went to Mass, and then went about their business, knocked on 14 doors and went in and shot 14 officers of British Army officers and intelligence people and so on. And McLean was one of these guys that got shot. So that was later in the day. You had the Croke Park massacre, 14 more. And that night, Clancy and Dick McKee, Paddy Clancy and Dick McKee, are arrested, and they're brought to a guard room in Dublin Castle, and they're murdered there. Themselves and Conor Clune, who happened kind of innocent enough business he had there, I think, you know. Darcy Street was the new name for John Street. John Street was probably our friend here, maybe, John Ormsby, Vandeleur, I'm not sure. And this street's new name was Darcy Street. It's a very interesting story. Michael Darcy was about 21 years old, and he was from Clare. And Michael Darcy is hanging around at the village one day, and he notices that a Constable Costigan, who had lived in the place, but who had been they had kind of forced them to close the barracks. And Costigan has come back with a lorry and some pals to collect his furniture, because he had moved down to Knock. And Darcy runs out the road as fast as he can to Johnsy Liddy's house, because Johnsy Liddy was the brigade commandant. And he runs out the road to his place as fast as he can, and he tells Johnsy Liddy, they're moving furniture. All cops there are loads of them in there. There's about 6 of them, 5 or 6 of them. And Johnsy Liddy decides, on the spur of the moment, that he'll put together a group and that they'll set an ambush for these boys out the road. They picked a pretty good spot. I'll explain to you why in a moment. Now, after that, it's a little bit fuzzy. Michael Darcy there on the left, he appears to have been the scout. So he's closer to the village than the boys further out. They're on the right-hand side of the road, and he's closer to the village at the top of a hill. And I'm not familiar with the road, but I think there's a hill going up outside the village on the Tiernan Road, but I'd be fairly right there. So he's at the top of that hill on the left-hand side, and the other 4 are across the road on the right-hand side. Liddy and Michael Campbell and Sonny Burke was there, like I mentioned earlier on. And he sees them coming and he gives the signal. But what he sees coming is the van, or the lorry, comes first. And the lorry goes down along the road, and Campbell has Camel, I should say. They didn't call him Campbell, they called him Camel. That was the local name, they called them around here. They didn't pronounce the B. And he had loaded this, a shore gun or a punt gun, I'm not sure which, but he had kind of overloaded it. He had stuffed it with all sorts of metal and loads of powder, about 5 times more than he should have. And when the car came, or the van came, he let fly, he let it go, and of course it knocked him back, and it caused more smoke than anything else, and the only damage it did was to break the windshield. So the boys in the van, the policemen in the van, they accelerated fast down the road, and they stopped and began to return fire. Meanwhile, Michael Darcy, he spots Costigan and two other police on the way on bicycles. And they had fallen behind because they had to walk up the hill. They had to get off the bicycles. And he kind of, well, there's a little bit of panic at this stage. There were 4 men, I think, on the right-hand side. 3 of them go one way, and the other one crosses the road for some reason. And Darcy is on that side of the road, and he sees him running, and he follows him. So, where are we now? Yeah, he signals, sorry, I'm on the next one. He heads eastward, followed by the police. He tries to cross the river, and he goes under. So he's in trouble straight away. Miss Reedy sees him in the water. Sergeant Daly points a rifle and orders her to get back. And Patrick O'Brien he finds the body in the Powell Moor 2 days later, the 21st of January. At the inquest, the witness John Breac said that he would have attempted to save the drowning boy, but he was held back by police. Brock's evidence was corroborated by Patrick O'Brien, who said that the police threatened him as well. If he didn't get back, they'd shoot him. The jury's verdict was willful murder, and it condemned the police for not allowing Darcy to be rescued. There was a huge military presence and police presence at the funeral, and were they allowed, after the grave had been filled? Yes, a volley of shot. They didn't go into the cemetery, they were allowed to fire the things. And Darcy's mother, Margaret Darcy, was later given a service medal, but he was awarded posthumously for his role in that. He was only 21 years old. We're on to the next 2 are Mac and Shanahan, and obviously I'm related to Willie Shanahan, and so I can ad-lib this part of it. I don't ad-lib it. I don't have to rely on notes too much. But Henry Street was named McNamara Street, and Francis Street, after Lady Frances Vandeleur, was named Shanahan Street after Willie. That was in 1930. So if I just go back again, difficult to know who Henry Street was named after in terms of Vandeleur people. It's difficult to know always with them all because they kept repeating these names. You know, there could be an Ormsby in every generation, and there was a Moore in every generation, and there was a John in nearly every generation, as happens in a lot of families. So very often it's difficult to know who exactly the street is named after in terms of the Vandeleurs. So Francis Street gets named after Willie. Willie would have died at the age of 24. McNamara would have died at the age of 29, I think it was, you know. And basically these 2 guys, Willie ended up Chief of Police at the West Clare Brigade IRA. His job would be to go to the Republican courts and maybe to enforce their decisions. And a lot of their decisions related to land and disputes and things like that. So if a decision was made by a Republican court, that would be his job, to reinforce it, make sure that the decision was carried out by the people on whom it was imposed. And McNamara was kind of much the same. They were certainly on the run together all the time. Where things went a bit sour was after the capture and the killing of Captain Alan Lendrum at Caherphoenix on the 22nd, Wednesday the 22nd of September 1920. And Willie is not involved in the ambush. We know who was in the ambush. But it was kind of, we reckon, and we can't be 100% certain, but from the best knowledge available, they wanted his car. He was a nice guy, so there was no reason to kill him. And I haven't met anybody who, or read any account by anybody who felt that he would have deserved what he got, or that he was a bad egg or anything like that. He was a pretty nice guy. He used to give lifts to the kids in his car and that, because it was a big novelty at that time. But Willie comes along after the shooting, and Lendrum is injured. And he is the only person who can drive. And the guys are pushing the car, and they don't know. They don't understand that you have to actually move the steering wheel, and the car is going in on the ditch. But he knows that, and he starts it up, and he takes the car away, and he probably brings it to Dulac Lake. But from that time on, somebody told the authorities that Willie was the man to get, and that if he hadn't done it, he knew who did it. Well, he knew who did it, all right, but anyway, he hadn't actually been involved. Insofar as we can tell, he had no involvement in the actual attack or the ambush on Lendrum. So his home started to get raided at Ocean View out near Duckmore, and a typical exchange would be, we're here to butcher Willie Shanahan. We'll shoot him if he doesn't tell us who shot Lendrum. And his father said, well, I'll shoot him if he does. That was his answer. And we're here to butcher Willie Shanahan. That was the kind of language they used. And at one time they arrested one of his brothers, and they threatened that they'd take him away. But kind of a friendly RIC officer intervened and didn't allow it. He went on the run with Michael McNamara for a while, and they may have been, I don't know, they may have been a little naive. They stayed in Mrs. Reedy's in Newtown for quite a while. I think a month. They were a month in Mrs. Reedy's house in Newtown. And again, somebody told the authorities where they were, and they were arrested on the night of the 16th, 17th of December, 1920. And they were taken into Kilrush, and they were actually arrested by a guy named Brenton Halliburton Ashmore, a 20-year-old, if you don't mind, a Royal Scot. And I'm going to tell you something that maybe you may have read, or you may or may not know. The Black and Tans were blamed for an awful lot around that time that they didn't do at all. And it was the Royal Scots that did most of it, I can tell you that for sure. They're regular soldiers of the Royal Scots. And I can show you proof of that at any time. Now, a lot of people find it hard to take because it's kind of embedded in our knowledge base that it was Black and Tans who did it, not in West Clare. I can show any of you the proof of that by email or anything, anytime you want. So he's arrested by this guy, and 60 years later, this guy gives an interview to the War Museum in London, and he's being asked. Now, he's 82 years old. Yeah, 62 years later. He's 82 years old. And he's reminiscing on his life. And he's asked, and you spent some time in Ireland? Yes, I was in Ireland, in Clare. I was in County Clare. Yes, we were based in Ennis Island. Yeah, we used to go looking for these guys, these Sinn Féiners. Sinn Féin. Yes. I actually caught one time, and he made a bit of a joke about it, Willie Shanahan comes tripping out of his tongue. And I'm saying when I heard it, where did that come from? He's 62 years later. Never heard what happened to him afterwards. And I said, by God, you heard it all right. You knew darn well what happened to him afterwards. Because I don't think you remember those ones so easily. Tried to run away. And we found this recording, and I often talk about the little nuggets of information that you find, and that was one of them. It's just, his voice is there still. I have it on the laptop even. Still, I play it every now and again, So, they're taken to Kilrush. They're tortured a bit in Kilrush. Why? Because they want to know who shot Lendrum, and the boys won't tell them. 22nd of December, they've probably hurt them a bit at that stage, so they decide they better move them to Ennis. They had a jail, the barracks in Ennis, around where Dunn's Stores is now. So they bundled them into the van, and they're on the way over. Very difficult to know exactly what happened, but the best construct we can put on it was that McNamara was bayoneted because his family had his coat for years afterwards with the stab wound in it, and that he was shot. We believe he was told to get out and walk home, you're free to go, and that he started to walk away and that they shot him in the back and bayoneted him as well. When they get to Ennis, these are Royal Scots. When they get to Ennis, they put out the story that prisoner shot attempting to escape. But that, I would say on the 18th actually, I think it was on the 18th or the 20th of December, one of the top dogs in England had put out a notice that you can't keep saying that people were attempting to escape, because it was happening all over the country. It was becoming an epidemic. And they said, we're not standing for this anymore. Somebody said, we can't have this anymore. So they changed the story, and they said then that he was accidentally shot while going over a bump on the road. So that was the excuse they gave. So then Willie's brought into Ennis. He's put into a cell in Ennis, and he's left there through the night. He is probably beaten badly, and I can explain to you again why, but I don't have time to go into it now. He's probably beaten badly, and he's left probably without clothes, and I can explain to you again how I know that as well. And he bangs on the railings during the night, and he looks for a blanket probably. And there's one bad egg in Ennis named William Strath, a company sergeant major, and he shoots him through the back of the head, and that's the end of that. The two boys are buried on Christmas Day. The day after they're killed, the 23rd, 11 lorry loads of military pull into Doonbeg, and they round up all the local guys, and they line them up as if to shoot them. Probably frustration that the two guys didn't tell them what they wanted to know. So, for two young guys, they were pretty brave, no more than the others were, you know. So, Brendan, you're a bit late, but I'll watch this. I'll give you a run through it later. Is that fair enough? No bother. So, they are commemorated in the Republican plot. Not the only ones that are commemorated in the Republican plot, but that's where they were buried on Christmas Day. And in 1928, this Celtic cross was erected to their memory. So now we're on to Crawford Street and Grace Street, from after Lady Grace, probably. This was renamed after Dan Crawford. Dan Crawford was from Cork, and Dan Crawford was a little bit different to all the others because he's the first of the people we're going to talk about. Well, he's not actually. He's the second who we're going to talk about tonight, who would have died later, post-treaty. And he's a member of Cork Company 4th Battalion. He's active in the War of Independence. He's a member of the Active Service Unit during the Civil War. And he's arrested near Kilmahill and he's lodged in Limerick jail. There he goes on hunger strike. And after he's released in bad health, and he dies in October 1924. He's buried with his grandparents in Kilrush Cemetery out near Milton Malby there. And no monument, no inscription over his grave, which is a little bit sad because he's not the only one. There'll be a couple of those. He's listed in the Roll of Honour as died or killed on active service. This man is very interesting. This is John Breen. John Breen was from Kilmahill, only son. 21 years old, 6'1", 6'2", big man. I'm writing a paper about him at the moment that hopefully will be published in the Clare Association Yearbook. So that's I just happened to have been doing that recently. And Vandeleur Street is named after him. And this is his story. He's born in 1899 in Kiltumper. He's an only child. His father's name is Michael, I think. I forget the mother's name. He works on the farm. He goes to Clonagalan School. He takes up the position of adjutant of Committal Company when it's founded in 1917. He's quartermaster in 2nd Battalion 1919. He's put in jail in Dundalk for illegal drilling, which was a lot of that going on at the time. Guys would meet after Mass And they'd go off down the road and they'd line up in formation, they'd start marching up and down, and sometimes the RIC would come along, break it up, arrest people, take them away. So his illegal drilling of volunteers during the anti-conscription demonstrations in 1918, and there he meets Dick McKee, Paddy Clancy's friend, and he meets Oscar Traynor, later to become Minister for Defence, and he meets Sean Tracy, who's shot on Talbot Street. You'll probably remember that story, and you've seen his photograph, the line on Talbot Street, as well as Murty Tubridy that we mentioned earlier on from Ballyket. On the 18th of April, 1920, John Breen gets up and he has breakfast with his father at 7 o'clock or half, I can't remember which. And he goes to First Mass. And going to that First Mass also were a number of RIC men. And the RIC men used to take it in turns to guard each other going to Mass. So you'd have one group going to Mass and the other group would be behind them with guns, ready to guard them in case it was an attack. And you may wonder where did all this come from, but it actually came from persecution of locals. There was a lot of bad stuff going on. There was a lot of ill treatment and persecution of local guys going on at the time. I don't have time to go into it here, but I do have the detail of it. I do know that Father Charlie Culligan, and some of you probably knew him when he was in Clare. I know that he exhorted the ladies of the parish to go after them with their hat pins. So, but there was provocation. That's the point I'm trying to make here. So this is very interesting. So you have a number of RIC men going into the church, and you have 3 RIC men behind them. Mass is over and they come back out. The main guys, the district inspector and the others walk on ahead up towards the RIC barracks outside of Kilmihill Church. Followed behind them are Constable Carroll, Sergeant Carroll on the right, Collins in the middle, and Martin on the left. And behind them are 3 of the local boys. On the right, Martin Milliken. In the middle, John O'Dea. On the left, Peter McMahon. Behind them are John Breen and Michael Kilrush, and their job is to cover the 3 lads in front. The 3 guys in front, simple job, shoot them and take their weapons. It was a daring thing to do, and a Sunday morning there was a bit of criticism afterwards about it, but it was sanctioned by the OC, that's what they say. John Z. Liddy would have sanctioned it. So, Milliken fires and he kills Carroll. In the middle, O'Dea fires and he hits, Collins in the back, and he disables him. The bullet hits his spine and he becomes a wheelchair bound for the rest of his life, I think. He's maimed. And on the left-hand side, you have Peter McMahon, and his gun jams because he got it from a returning Canadian, and the gun jams and it just doesn't fire for him. Everybody turns. Breen spots that Martin is still standing, and he stays to cover for the others. And Martin turns around, and Breen points the gun. They fire at the same time, and Constable Martin's bullet hits Breen just here in the forehead. And he falls back, and he's dead within a very short period of time. Breen falls. The inquest. Jury foreman John Chambers recorded the following verdict. We find that John Breen died from shock and hemorrhage caused by a bullet wound inflicted by Constable Martin while Breen was fighting for the freedom of his country. Many hundreds of volunteers, a huge crowd. We've heard thousands, and we've heard 500, and we've heard 800. But there does seem to have been a huge number. It seems to have been a massive funeral. They came from all over. And again, there was a huge presence at the graveyard, but there was no shots fired because they wouldn't allow it. John Breen is remembered with a big Celtic cross. He died for the olden cause, a cause that shall not be. I can't read it now, I'm sorry. Even with the glasses, I'd have to go up beside. And a little bit in Irish as well. Funny thing, and you'll notice it about a lot of these guys, that when they died, often they changed their name to the Irish version, you know. But it's like Paddy Clancy and Sean Breen. His name was John Breen, and Paddy Clancy was Peter Clancy. And I know that my grandfather at one time changed Willie's name to Liam. I suppose he wanted to be as good as the others, you know. So it was just a thing that they did. And there was one other thing that they did. If I died a private or an ordinary volunteer, I was usually elevated to the rank of some sort of an officer afterwards. If I died in action. It was generally the way they did things. I've seen that happen a few times. It was official for 1916 people that if they died, they would always be elevated to the rank of an officer. It was common practice, and it was recorded. John O'Gorman was from Cloonagarnon, which is very near where I grew up myself. He attended local Clahan school. He joined the 3rd Battalion, that's Clahan's Cree, West Clare Brigade, 1917. He plays an active part in the War of Independence, and he joins the West Clare Active Service Unit during the Civil War 1922. He's killed in action at Kildysart in August 1922, and he's buried with full military honours in the Republican plot in Doonbeg. Patrick O'Dea is only 19. He's from Carramore North, where I grew up, and he attended local school. We have very sketchy details on these, so if anybody is able to give me more, I'd be delighted to get it. There's very little on them at the moment. But we're lucky to have the photographs, because in a lot of cases, you can't get them. He's a very good long-distance swimmer, and again, he's an active part in the War of Independence. He joins the West Clare Active Service Unit in 1922, and he's fatally wounded at Ballyket on the 15th of July, and he's buried with full military honours in the Republican plot in Doonbeg Cemetery. And then we have the third one that's buried in that plot, and that's Michael Keene. Michael Keene is different to all the others, because Michael Keene actually went away and joined the Irish Guards Regiment of the British Army and served with them. But he deserted, and he came home in 1919, and he joined the Munmore Company with Martin Chambers and a few others in West Clare Brigade. He was a section leader, a training instructor, and he took the anti-treaty side, and he was a member of the brigade flying column. At the end of October 22, he got pneumonia, and he died on the 4th of November 22. Again, he was buried with full military honours at the Republican plot. The next man we talk about is Paddy Hasset. Paddy Hasset was a volunteer with Kilrush Company, 2nd Battalion, West Clare. In June 1920, there was a Sinn Féin arbitration court decision that was made against the steward at the big house out the road at Kilmore. That's Gore Hickman's house. And some judgment was made against the steward, and I think his name might be Martin, but I'm only guessing. I just can't remember it now. I have it somewhere. And he's out there to enforce this, but the steward is having none of it, and he's ready. So he refused to accept. He opens fire, and Hasset is shot in the crossfire by one of his own men accidentally. He's brought to Cree. They have trouble organising transport for him, and eventually, I think after a day or two, 4 days, Willie Hines in Kilkee he has a car, and he agrees to bring him. And even bringing him had to be probably done. It was difficult because there were curfews and everything, so there was only certain times of the day that you could actually go in a car. But they brought him there anyway, and he died the following day. He's buried in Kilrush. That's Paddy Hasset. John McSweeney was age 19, and his name was given to Hector Street for a time, after Hector Vandeleur. Now, Hector, I think, was one of the guys we were talking about in the first slide who did all the damage in the 1880s and that. They didn't like him a lot around here, I know that much for sure. So, John McSweeney, he's in Kilkee Company. He played with the Brass and Reed band. They had quite a good band back there at the time. He started in his teens with the Fianna Éireann. He took part in the Tan War. In the 22, he joined the Active Service Unit. And he's fatally wounded at Kildysart on the 7th of August. He's buried at Kiltunan with full military honours, and his comrades set up a cross to him. And that's a photograph of his funeral passing through Kilrush in August 1922. Christy McCarthy, Christy's from Clonlaheen, up near Mullock Milton Mabbey, out that way, out that part of the country. Corps Company, 4th Battalion, West Clare Brigade he founded. He used to be asking for arms. He was a bit of a, how would I put it? He wanted to be more active than he was able to be. He wanted to get more stuck in. And the local battalion weren't too supportive of that. And he was looking for arms and they weren't giving them. And eventually he went off to East Clare to the Brennans and he worked with them. But he's in an ambush at Cratloe, himself and Michael Gleeson. They decide at Cratloe that they're going to stop a train. Now they have somebody on the train to signal to them if there are soldiers on it, because there used to be soldiers travelling on the train a lot of the time. And they would be stopping it. The reason you stopped the train in those days was to find out who was writing letters and what they were writing in them, because you could find out an awful lot. And even though the trains kept getting held up, people still kept writing these letters and giving away information, It's quite common. So the guy on the train is coming out along the road, or the tracks, I should say, and the guy on the train waves out, no way. And the driver of the train knows what's going on as well, and he sees the barricade on the road and he just keeps driving straight through it. But there's an officer, a Royal Scots officer. You can tell I don't like the Royal Scots too much. But there's this officer named Alexander Gordon on the train. And they go on to the next station, and he had spotted what was happening. He copped on that there was something going on here. And he said, he went up to the driver and he ordered him, stop the train. All passengers out. Now he said, reverse back. And he reversed them back. And the lads were cutting telephone wires or something like that. And Gordon came out and they chased Gleeson and McCarthy. And to make a long story short, he caught McCarthy, and Gordon personally shot him and possibly cut his throat. And McCarthy's, we know because the person that was forced to lift his body away in some sort of a cart creel or something like that, he pulled back the sheet and he spotted this gaping wound on his throat. And he figured that Gordon had slit his throat with a bayonet. And McCarthy, that body wasn't released for 3 months. It was 3 months before they gave it up. So, Christy McCarthy and his family still have a lot of his papers and lists of men, lists of volunteers, where they came from, all that sort of stuff. Loads of lists. Membership badges, IRA membership cards and that sort of stuff. He had a lot of that as well. Keating Street, volunteer Patrick Keating. We know very little about him. I have no photograph. If anybody knows of one, you might tell me. He's born at Cross in Carrigaholt. He joins the volunteers in 1917, and again he's a member of the active service unit during the Civil War. He's mortally wounded in 1922 and he's buried with military honours. Don't know a lot about him, I'm afraid. But I know a little bit about Russell's Lane. Thomas Russell was a teacher from Dingle, and he was working at Carrigaholt College. And he was at a meeting in the local parish hall with about this many people in it. And it was being chaired by Eamon Fennell, local activist, well-known guy. And it's on a Sunday, have I got the date? 24th of March 1918. And the military come to the door and they say, what's going on here? And Fennell says, we're having a meeting here, we're entitled to have it. Do you know? And he says, get out. And Fennell says, we're not doing anything illegal, we're entitled to have a meeting. It was a Sinn Féin club meeting. He says, Sinn Féin have elected representatives and now we're entitled to be here. And the guy said, he called his men in and he said, put them out. And there was a bit of a stampede towards the door. As they were going to the door, the soldiers started to prod them with the bayonets. And one of the bayonets went in the back Fennel was one of them that he was holding the door for people to get them out fast. He was one of them that got it. And Thomas Russell was the other. And Thomas Russell died, I think, the following day or the next day in Kilrush Hospital. And at the inquest, the jury returned a verdict of murder against one of 4 soldiers whose names were given. Counsel for the military informed the jury that their verdict had no legal effect whatever. Eva Gore Booth wrote a letter to the Manchester Guardian on the 28th of April in the same year, and she said, "The soldiers stated that the people pressed on the bayonets, but a man cannot put his back against a vertical bayonet if he's standing on the floor." That's Constance Markovich's sister, and she wrote that to the Manchester Guardian in a letter, a big long letter about things Irish in general. She mentioned this in specific. And so the soldiers made out that the boys reversed into the bayonets. It was the kind of thing that happened, and I suppose it was the kind of thing that made people a little bit more entrenched in their views and in the way they dealt with things. So that's Thomas Russell. Bishop Fogarty at the time comments on it in a letter to Sinn Féin. He said, "Young men, the flower of the country, are being arrested wholesale, degraded, insulted, imprisoned, shot or bayoneted like poor Thomas Russell of Carrigaholt, the killing of whom is, in all its circumstances, one of the most horrid and atrocious things I have ever heard of. Were these things done in Belgium, how the world would be made to ring with the cry of German atrocities." So that's from the words of Bishop Fogarty in relation to Thomas Russell. Michael Fahey was our most energetic and prominent officer, David Conroy wrote. He became a South African policeman, David Conroy did afterwards. I don't know a lot about Michael Fahey, only a few basic facts. Had he lived, I am certain that the 5th Battalion would have played a much more prominent part in the subsequent fight than it did. He was a Kilkee man. He was adjutant of the 5th Brigade. Not certain, I think that might have been an elevation that happened after he died, maybe a posthumous kind of a thing. They did it a lot in those days. He had a particular interest in military drilling. He had been a wireless officer, and he was known to have been flashing signals in the company of Fred Barry and Tom Prendergast in Kilkee across the bay. He was standing talking to some girls on the seafront in February 1920, and whatever happened, he pulled the trigger by accident and it went off in his pocket and shot himself in the thigh. It was a small caliber bullet. He would have survived pretty well if he had got immediate treatment, but the police had heard the shot and they were watching, they were scouring the place to see what was going on here. And everything that was done after that had to be done in a clandestine kind of fashion. It took over a week to get him to hospital, and by then he had blood poisoning. He died on the 20th of March 1920, and he was buried in Kilfeera with military honours again. He was regarded as a massive loss. Now, Kilkee, you probably, I don't know if there are any people here from Kilkee, it's often kind of criticised or kind of said that, oh, well, they didn't do a whole lot, there was only 20 men really there, and it's often kind of trotted out as a kind of an issue. But I suppose Kilkee was a bit different to a lot of other places because it was a holiday location, it was a place where holiday makers came, and so things would probably have been different there, It may have been targeted less by, we'd say, aggressive military forces. And I suppose there would have been local people would have been less inclined to cause hassle for holiday makers because they'd upset business people and that in the town as well, So there were a number of issues in relation to Kilkee. Did I do well?
Very well.
How am I doing? Time-wise? Not bad. 1 hour even. Not bad, no, I didn't. I know I rushed it, I probably went very, very fast, but we fitted a lot in as well. A lot of brave young guys, and do believe that the Manchester martyrs had a big influence on these fellas. That kind of, I mean, they must have been big around here to say that a monument that size was put up in their memory. Those three guys, Alan, Larkin and O'Brien. And so I suppose the one thing that strikes me about them all is that they were all young and they were all quite brave. Every single one of them, yeah. In different ways. And I think that I have a feeling, and I'm sure some of you will be able to help me with this, that I have a feeling there must have been a political element to all this in terms of the fact that all the guys that were being celebrated were guys who either died before the treaty or took the anti-treaty side, or whose families took the anti-treaty side. I imagine that there might have been a bit of that about it. So that if you were on a street and you had a business, well, if you were pro-treaty, you might be more inclined to, or if you had been pro-treaty, you might be more inclined to call your shop McNamara Street. And if you weren't, you might be more inclined to call it Henry Street. So